it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Good evening, dear watchers of the night, and welcome back to the hour when the world holds its breath. As ever, I'll be your guide as we cross the perimeter between what we're told is safe and what waits just beyond the fence. This is a place where orders matter more than truth, and silence is not an absence but a warning. Now, before we begin, take a moment. Check the locks, lower the lights. Some stories aren't meant for daylight, and this one unfolds under floodlamps and watchtowers where the dark wears a uniform and knows your name. What you're about to hear is not a ghost story, it's a confession. A reminder that some systems are not built to protect us, but to prepare for what they already know is coming. So if you're ready to stand watch with those who've seen too much and have been ordered to forget, then stay with me. The perimeter is sealed, the reports are filed, and Tower 7 is back on the air. I'm a guard at a remote military base by Augustus Cordoba. Prologue. Fort Braxton sits just outside Fayetteville, North Carolina, tucked into a stretch of pine forest that swallows sound and light after sunset. From the highway, it looks like any other stateside installation. Chain-link fences, floodlights, guard towers spaced at careful intervals. Order, control, predictability. The kind of place civilians drive past without a second glance. But at night, the forest presses in close. The trees along the perimeter aren't old growth or wild in any romantic sense. They're managed, trimmed, and mapped. Pine and oak planted in neat, deliberate rows meant to create visibility and kill zones. Still, once the sun drops and the last colors bleed out of the sky, the woods become something else entirely. Shadows stack on top of shadows. Distances lie. Sounds carry too far or not at all. Tower 7 overlooks the least remarkable section of this perimeter. No sensitive facilities nearby, no classified labs, just fencing, trees, and a stretch of ground that rarely triggers motion sensors. It's the kind of post junior personnel draw during routine rotations, boring, uneventful, and safe. And that's why it matters. What happened there didn't unfold in a war zone or some unnamed black site overseas. It didn't happen during combat operations or classified field exercises. It happened on American soil during a standard night shift under rules and procedures designed for boredom, not survival. By morning there would be no report, no evidence, and no official memory of what occurred on that tower. The base would function as it always had. Vehicles would roll through the gates, flags would rise, orders would be issued and followed. And 3 soldiers would be expected to accept that nothing had happened at all. They didn't know it yet, but Fort Braxton had already decided what the truth was allowed to be. Part 1. The metal rungs were colder than they had any right to be as I climbed the ladder to the comms platform. Every step rang out hollow under my boots, loud enough to make me clench my jaw. My hands locked onto the rails, tighter than necessary, to be honest. My gut had been tight since lunch, twisted up and refusing to settle. I kept telling myself it was just pre-deployment nerves, but my body didn't care. Rick was already topside, running checks and moving through the setup like muscle memory had taken over. He was calm and precise. Tower duty always did that to him. Alan hauled himself up behind me, breathing heavier than usual. "Yeah, radio's live," Rick said, adjusting the dial. "Base command wants first check-in at 2100. I stepped to the observation window and looked down over Fort Braxton. Barracks, admin blocks, clean lines, military and neat. But the view didn't feel quite right. The base looked muted, like someone had dialed the whole place down a notch. Normally there was noise, vehicles rolling, voices carrying, generators humming, but tonight it all felt smothered. "Quiet," Rick said, joining me. Alan dropped his gear near the radio. "That's Tuesday night. People are crashed out or glued to a screen." I kept scanning. My eyes were drifting back to the tree line beyond the fence. Pines and oak, dark and solid about 200 yards out. Nothing out of place, well, except for the feeling that something out there knew we were up here. "The weather's off," I said, just to break the silence. Rick nodded. "No wind, that's rare." The air felt thick, like the pause before something breaks. Well, the forecast had said clear skies, and stars were already burning through overhead. Well, October in North Carolina should have been cool, but instead my uniform was clinging to my back. Alan settled into first watch, adjusting his chair. Yeah, relax. It's a boring shift. We're back in bunks by 0600. I wanted to believe him, but the feeling in my chest hadn't eased all day. 4 years in uniform, dozens of guard shifts. I never felt this kind of dread. Then the radio crackled. Tower 7, this is Base Command, radio check. Rick grabbed the handset. Base Command, Tower 7, signal clear. Copy. Next check-in at 2200. Roger. Tower 7 out. A routine exchange. Still felt wrong, though. The voice on the other end sounded clipped somehow, rushed. I forgot it. I raised the night vision scope and started my first sweep. The world washed green. Empty ground, still trees. Guard posts looked fine, but I didn't catch movement from the other towers. The motor pool sat dead, vehicles lined up like museum pieces. Hey, anything? Alan asked. Negative. It didn't feel negative, though. It felt like being watched. I kept sweeping the tree line. No wind, no animals, no shifting branches, nothing to justify the alarms going off in my head. Rick scanned west with his binoculars. Alan monitored the radio, cutting through static. All routine. Clock checks came more often than they should. 21:30 passed. Nothing moved. No vehicles, no foot traffic. Even the lights felt fewer. Marriott windows were dark. Hey, when's the last Humvee you saw? I asked. Rick lowered his binoculars. Well, not since we got up here. Just feels dead. Motor pool maintenance, Alan offered, or everyone's packing for deployment. My gut rejected this. In 4 years, I'd never seen the base this inactive. 8,000 soldiers don't just vanish. Well, the radio stayed quiet, though. No chatter, no background noise. Even the static was starting to feel thin. Went back to the scope. Same sweep, same emptiness. Same shadows behaving exactly how they should. I couldn't stop scanning. Alan shifted. Man, you're making me nervous. Either find something or put it down. Just being thorough. You're being paranoid. Maybe. Stress, coffee, lack of sleep. But the clock now read 21:45, and the night already felt long. I kept the scope on the trees. An hour dragged by, sweep after sweep. My neck ached. The radio clock hit 2200. I lifted the handset. Base Command, this is Tower 7 with scheduled status report. I was met with the sound of static. I adjusted the squelch. Base Command, Tower 7 requesting acknowledgement. More static. What a pop, like someone had keyed a mic and then nothing. Hey, that's not right, Rick said. I mean, they always answer. I switched channels. Motor pool control. This is Tower 7, radio check. Again, silence. By 2300, something had finally changed. It made my blood run cold. The base had gone dead. Not quiet, completely silent. No generators, no vehicles, no distant voices, nothing. I lowered the scope and listened, straining for anything that said life was still moving down there. There was nothing. Rick, I said quietly, come here. He stepped over. Yeah, what? Listen. We stood there for half a minute staring down at the base. The silence felt engineered, like someone had flipped a master switch. Yeah, that's not normal, Rick said. What the hell is everyone? I switched frequencies. Tower 5. Tower 5, this is Tower 7, radio check. Nothing answered back. I cycled through every guard post channel, calling each one twice. Same result every time. Dead air, static, nothing. I mean, no voices, no acknowledgements, just emptiness. Rick was pressed up against the observation glass, binoculars locked on the base. I've got lights on in admin, he said, but there's zero movement, No vehicles, no people. It's like the place just got wiped. Cold slid through my chest that had nothing to do with the night air. I brought the night vision scope back up and started another sweep, this time slower, hunting specifically for signs of life. Well, the motor pool was blacked out. The barracks had a few lit windows, but no shadows moving inside. The main gate looked unmanned, which should have been impossible. There were always guards there, always. Hey, maybe it's a drill, Rick said, but he didn't sound convinced himself. Well, they'd tell us, I said, and they'd answer the 2200 check-in. I pushed the scope along the fence line, tower by tower. Tower 5 looked empty, Tower 3 too. Either the other guards were hugging cover hard, or something had gone wrong. Damn, this makes no sense, I muttered, tweaking the focus as the scope reached the tree line. That's when I saw him. Right at the forest's edge, about 200 yards out, stood a single figure in military fatigues. He was facing our tower, standing dead still between the trees. My grip tightened. Hey, Rick, look. I kept the figure centered while Rick brought his binoculars up. Standard gear, BDUs, tactical vest. Couldn't see a weapon from this distance. What stood out, though, was the stillness. No weight shift, no head movement, no gear adjustment. Nothing. You see him? I asked. Yeah, Rick said after a beat. Right at the tree line, facing us. How long's he been there? No idea. I wasn't watching that sector. Through the scope, the night vision painted him green, but the shape was unmistakably human. Average height, military stance. Very, very perfect and, well, a bit too rigid. Hey, what's he doing? Rick asked. Standing. That's it. I watched the seconds tick by. 30, 60, 90. No one stood that still. Not on patrol, not on guard. I pulled my tactical flashlight and aimed at the trees. 3 quick flashes, friendly identification signal, and then I waited. Nothing. Hey, try the radio, Rick said. Maybe he's got comms. I keyed the mic on the patrol frequency. Unknown patroller, grid 77 Delta. This is Tower 7. Identify yourself. Static. Alan finally looked out from the radio console. Could just be another guard. Roving patrol, maybe. No, I said, my eyes still locked on the figure. I know the routes. Nobody's supposed to be there. Not now. Well, he's clearly military, Alan said. Look at his kit. That was the problem. Legit guards didn't stand frozen in the woods for minutes at a time, staring at towers. They moved, they checked in, they followed procedure. I waited for something normal, a head turn, a hand movement, anything. There was nothing. I don't like this, I said. Rick lowered his binoculars then. You think this is bad? Oh, bad didn't cover it. Silent base, dead radios, and now this thing watching us from the trees. I switched back to base command. Base command, this is Tower 7 with an emergency status report. We have an unidentified individual at the perimeter. Advise. Static answered, but under it was something else. The sound of voices, distorted. I adjust the squelch. Base command, Tower 7 requesting immediate response. Clarify patrol assignments in Sector 77 Delta. The static dropped out for a second, and my blood turned to ice. My own voice came through the speaker. Tower 7 requesting immediate evacuation. Multiple hostiles approaching. I stared at Rick and Alan. Neither of them had moved. What the hell was that? Rick said. I don't know. I keyed the mic again. Base command, respond. We're experiencing comms interference. The reply came back in Alan's voice this time. Perfect match. While he stood 3 feet from the radio. Base command, Tower 7 is compromised. Send reinforcements immediately. Alan went pale. Hey, I didn't say that. Rick grabbed the backup radio. Right, switching to emergency frequency. I turned back to the scope and felt my stomach drop. The figure wasn't alone anymore. Part 2. A dozen shapes now stood along the tree line, spread out in both directions from where the first one had been, and every single one faced the tower, and none of them moved. Rick, I said, never taking my eye off the scope. There are more of them. His radio crackled, and then his own voice came out of it, calm and plainly wrong. Emergency frequency compromised. Unknown entities have breached the perimeter. Rick dropped the handset like it burned him. That's not possible. How are we hearing ourselves? I counted again, sweeping left to right. 14 shapes now, all in military-looking gear, all frozen in place between the trees. No chatter, no hand signals, no movement at all. Hey, Alan, look at this. He took the scope. 1 second was all it took. The skepticism vanished from his voice. They shouldn't be there. No patrols run through that sector. He, count them. 14, no, hold on. He adjusted the focus. More coming out of the trees. At least 20 now. Rick tried the radio again, jumping frequencies. Same result every time. Our voices saying things none of us had said. Panic-filled transmissions, warnings, calls for help. It sounded like we were listening to some other version of ourselves dying on the air. I took the scope back. God, the tree line was worse now. 30 figures at least, stepping out from behind trunks or simply appearing from the shadows. Each one took a position facing the tower and locked into that same unnatural stillness. Hey, this isn't a drill, I said. No shit, Alan muttered. Never seen anything like this. Rick checked his rifle, chambering around. Maybe we signaled them. Try visual contact. I raised the flashlight and aimed it at the forest. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short. Standard distress signal. Nothing answered. The figures didn't react. They just stood there on an even wall of silhouettes. The radio kept spitting out warped versions of our voices, requests for backup, reports of breaches, emergencies we hadn't lived through yet. Hey, how many now? Rick asked. I counted again, slowly and carefully. Fuck, the line stretched across the entire visible forest, 50 at least, probably more where the trees blocked my view. Well, we're surrounded, I said quietly. Alan started checking his gear, loading his rifle. What do we do? None of our training covered this. Guard duty meant IDs and vehicles, not faceless soldiers appearing out of nowhere and ignoring every protocol. My hand shook on the scope. The silent base, the dead radios, the watching figures. We, prepped for the worst, I said, even though I didn't know what that meant. Rick moved to cover the west. Alan stayed near the radios, monitoring the corrupted transmissions while watching the southern tree line. I kept scanning, counting and recounting as the numbers seemed to grow every time I looked. The radio crackled again. My voice. Tower 7 is surrounded. Request immediate extraction. I'd never said it, but staring at the mass in the trees, I knew it was true. And then everything changed. Without warning, every figure stepped forward at exactly the same time. They were moving as one. Through the grey haze of night vision, I watched them advance with mechanical precision. As they cleared the forest edge, more shapes poured out behind them. Dozens more, filling the gaps, swelling their ranks. Hey, they're moving, I called out. Rick dropped his binoculars and brought his rifle up, working the bolt. A metallic click rang too loudly in the silence, and Alan turned from the radios, his face drained of color. Rick took position at the northwest corner. Hey, warning shots? Not yet, I said, my finger brushing the safety. Let's just see what they do. Well, they kept coming. Same pace, same formation. No slips, no hesitation. They crossed uneven ground, equipment, obstacles. Nothing slowed them down as they closed in on the tower. They didn't stumble or hesitate. They just walked forward like the ground itself was mapped into their heads. At 50 yards out, every single one of them stopped at the exact same moment. Not a slowdown, not one lagging behind, just an instant freeze. When I swept the scope around, my stomach dropped. They'd formed a perfect ring around the tower. Even spacing, clean geometry. This wasn't chance. They've boxed us in, I said, lowering the scope long enough to wipe sweat out of my eyes. The air hadn't warmed, but my back was soaking. My hands trembled when I brought the scope back up, and I had to choke up on it to keep the image steady. Well, nothing happened. They stood there, facing inward, locked in that same impossible stillness they'd had at the tree line. No movement, no signals, no sign of intent. The radios hissed now and then, coughing up warped echoes of conversations we'd never had. Alan worked the radio again, bouncing frequencies, calling out to base command, to the other towers, anyone. Every reply was the same. Our voices, twisted and urgent, talking to themselves. I kept scanning the circle, trying to make sense of it. Real people shifted, adjusted gear, rolled their shoulders. These things didn't. Through the green wash of night vision, I could see standard kit, BDUs, vests, regulation gear. But the faces were wrong. Just dark hollows where features should have been. Hey, what are they waiting for? Rick asked. I don't know. Well, the night pressed in on us. My uniform clung to my skin. My own breathing sounded loud in the dead silence. No sound of generators, no distant engines. The base felt completely abandoned, like we were standing in a sealed-off pocket of nothing. And then it happened. Every single one of them opened their mouths. The sound that came out froze my blood. Oh, a shriek tore through the air, rising from over 100 throats at once. It started low, almost human, then climbed into a pitch that stabbed straight through my ears and rattled the tower's steel. Part scream, part howl, part something my brain refused to label. The noise bounced off empty buildings and just lingered, hanging in the air long after it should have died. I dropped the scope and clamped my hands over my ears. Rick did the same, his rifle forgotten. Alan collapsed beside the radio rack, clutching his head, his face twisted in pain, and then silence. The scream cut off instantly. God, my ears rang, my heart hammered. I snapped the scope back up, and they were already moving. They charged. Every one of them broke into a sprint, shrieking again as they came. They crossed the 50 yards of open ground in mere seconds, faster than any human could move. Well, my rifle was up before I even thought about it. I dropped to one knee behind the railing and shouldered the weapon. Training took over. Right, open fire. The muzzle flash lit the platform as I fired. Bolt, fire, bolt, fire. Center mass, just like they taught us. Rick opened up from the west side, and Alan joined in from near the radios. Oh, we hit them. Rounds punched into chests and torsos. Dark stains spread across their fatigues. But they didn't fall. They didn't even slow. Hey, they're not going down, Rick shouted. I kept firing, cycling the bolt without thinking. They reached the base of the tower and fanned out around the support legs. And then they started climbing. They scaled the steel like gravity didn't apply to them, hands gripping bare metal, hauling themselves up with fluid, predatory speed. No ropes, no gear, and no hesitation. Rick shifted fire to the climbers. Rounds sparked off the steel, but he kept shooting and they kept coming. Alan, secure the door, I yelled. Alan dropped his rifle and dragged heavy equipment cases to the access hatch. The ladder shaft was the only way up. He slammed the cases against the door and threw his weight into them. If they reached the top, that door was all that stood between us and whatever those things really were. I snapped the night vision scope back to my eye and locked onto one of them halfway up the tower. Up close, the details came into focus. My God, I immediately wished they hadn't. Its face was pure wrong. The mouth split its head nearly in half, stretched far past where any human jaw should end. Inside were teeth, too many of them, jagged, uneven, stacked in overlapping rows like shards of broken glass jammed together. No pattern to it, no order, just chaos. But his eyes were worse. Not dark, just empty. Solid black spheres that swallowed the night vision glow instead of reflecting it. No whites, no iris, just void staring back at me. It was close enough to human to register, but twisted enough to trigger pure panic. It wore standard combat fatigues and a tactical vest like the others, but the gear couldn't hide what it really was. And then, something slammed into the access door below us. The impact ran through the platform. Alan dug in harder against his barricade, boots skidding on the metal deck as whatever was underneath hammered its way up. The door bowed outward with every hit, the frame screaming under pressure no human body should have been able to generate. "God, they're in the ladder shaft," Alan yelled. Rick kept firing at the climbers, his rifle barking non-stop, the barrel smoking. Brass casings bounced and skidded across the platform as he worked the bolt, trying to cut them down before they reached us. At least 6 were already on the structure, crawling upward with that same inhuman speed, taking hits but just ignoring them. And then the door blew inward. The barricade exploded apart. Equipment cases flew across the platform as something burst through with brutal force. One of them landed in a low crouch, identical to the thing I'd been watching, the mouth stretched wide, the eyes black and locked onto Alan. It lunged. Alan hit the deck hard as the creature slammed into him, his rifle clattering away across the metal. His scream tore through the chaos, pure fear from pure pain. The thing pinned him, clawing at his arms and chest. God, even from 10 feet away I could see its hands were awful, fingers so long, with too many joints, bending in ways bones shouldn't bend. Rick spun from the west side and fired at least 3 rounds into its back. The first 2 punched through its vest, dark fluid spreading across the fabric. The third hit high, just below the neck. And that finally did it. The creature went limp, collapsing on top of Alan, its impossible mouth still gaping. I grabbed its shoulders and hauled it off him. The body felt heavier than it should have been, dense and solid. The uniform was rough under my hands, and the skin beneath was cold, in a way I couldn't explain. Alan rolled away, clutching his left arm. Blood soaked his sleeve, 4 deep parallel gashes running from elbow to wrist. Muscle showed beneath torn flesh. Fuck, he was bleeding hard, but his eyes were clear. How bad?" I asked, pulling him upright against the radio rack. "Hurts like hell," he said through clenched teeth, "but I can move it." "What the hell was that?" I looked down at the body sprawled across the platform. Up close, the wrongness was undeniable. The grotesque mouth, the black eyes staring at nothing. The hands were unmistakably inhuman, fingers stretched inches too long with extra joints that allowed them to bend any direction they wanted. Below us, the sound of metal rang out. One clang, then another, and then many. I grabbed the scope and looked down. Dozens of them were climbing now, swarming the tower from every side. The framework groaned as they hauled themselves upward in perfect coordination. "Hey, we got more coming," I called. Rick was already tracking the targets. He fired. The round sparked off a support beam inches from a creature's head. It didn't flinch, it just reached higher and kept climbing. They all did. A wall of bodies moving up the tower from every angle. I joined Rick at the edge and opened fire, while the muzzle flashes strobed the night, freezing the scene in violent snapshots. Faces tilted up toward us, black eyes reflecting nothing as they climbed straight through our gunfire. Alan tore fabric from his shirt and wrapped it around his arm, cinching it tight with his teeth. Blood still seeped through, but it had slowed. He then grabbed his rifle with his good hand and took his place beside us, firing one-handed. The truth was, though, we were running out of time. I was already on my third magazine, and Rick was down to his last. Alan wouldn't last long at the rate he was firing. And the creatures never slowed. More kept appearing at the base, starting their climb. I was counting rounds, wondering how long we could hold once the ammo was gone, when everything stopped. Every creature on the tower froze. No hesitation, no transition, they just locked in place, clinging to the metal framework like someone had cut the power. The ones still on the ground froze where they stood, mid-step toward the support pillars. The scraping, the climbing, the metal-on-metal noise, all of it died at once. What was left was the echo of our last shots and the high-pitched whine in my ears. For 30 seconds, nothing moved. They hung onto the tower exactly as they'd been when whatever signal had hit them, bodies locked in place across the steel like a nightmare sculpture. I kept my rifle trained on the nearest climber, finger tight on the trigger, waiting for the rush to start again. But it never came. Instead, all of them began to move at the same time, downwards. They backed off the tower in perfect sync, descending with slow, deliberate motions. No panic, no urgency, just controlled mechanical withdrawal, as calculated as the assault itself. And within minutes, every one of them was back on the ground. And then, they turned and walked away. Part 3. I tracked them through the scope as they crossed the open ground toward the tree line, maintaining flawless spacing and timing. This didn't look like a retreat. It looked like a command had been executed. None of them looked back. Their twisted faces stayed pointed toward the forest as they covered the same distance they'd charged across earlier. And then they were gone. They slipped into the trees and vanished completely. I swept the entire tree line left to right, searching for any movement. Nothing. No heat, no motion, just darkness. All that remained was the torn earth, claw marks in the soil, and spent brass scattered across the platform. Then reality slammed back into place. Generators kicked in across the base, their low hum flooding the silence. Engines roared in the motor pool, headlights cut through the dark as vehicles began moving between buildings. Behind us, the radio crackled to life. Normal chatter, shift rotations, status checks, logistics. Boring everyday noise that felt impossible after hours of static and phantom voices. Rick grabbed the handset and tried base command again, using the same frequency that had been dead all night. Base command, this is Tower 7, requesting immediate medical support and backup. Well, the reply came instantly. Tower 7, base command copies. Medical and security teams are en route. ETA 10 minutes. Rick stared at the radio like it had just betrayed him. Well, the operator sounded calm, detached, like this was just another box to check. I lowered the scope and looked out over Fort Braxton with my own eyes then. Lights burned in windows that had been black all night. Personnel moved between buildings. Guard towers swept their sectors in clean, disciplined arcs. It was so normal, it made my head spin. For a moment, I wondered if the silence and emptiness had ever been real at all. Then I looked down at the body on our platform. The thing hadn't changed. The massive mouth packed with jagged teeth, the black, lightless eyes, the elongated fingers bent at impossible angles. Whatever response team was coming, there was no way to write this off as stress or malfunction. Headlights then appeared on the access road. A convoy. Fast. At least 6 vehicles, including military trucks and others I didn't recognize. They arrived with surgical timing, right after the creatures had disappeared and the base snapped back to life. Alan sat slumped against the radio rack, his bandage soaked through, but he was watching the convoy with open relief. Rick still held the handset, like he expected it to turn silent again. Hey, how long were we cut off? He asked, checking his watch. I checked mine. 02:47. We'd taken the platform at 9 o'clock. Nearly 6 hours gone. Well, that attack had felt like minutes. The isolation before it, maybe a couple of hours at most. 6 hours, I said. We lost almost the whole night. The convoy reached the tower and deployed fast. Spotlights flared on, bathing the structure in harsh white light. Soldiers fanned out around the support pillars, locking down the area. Medics unloaded gear, moving like they were expecting bodies. Now this was not a standard response. An unmarked vehicle pulled in directly beneath us. Its doors opened and several figures in dark clothing stepped out. No insignia, no visible rank. They unloaded equipment that didn't look medical. Plastic sheeting, sealed containers, heavy bags. Cleanup gear. They moved with quiet confidence, setting up beneath the ladder access like this was all familiar to them. I brought the scope back up and watched them work, assembling containment rigs and body bags with practiced speed. Whatever had happened tonight, they'd seen it before. Well, the timing said it all. They showed up with the right vehicles, the right people, and the right gear, like they already knew exactly what was waiting for them on our platform. "Yeah, they're coming up," Rick said, nodding toward the ladder hatch. The access door opened and a soldier came through first, rifle raised, eyes sweeping the platform. 2 medics followed, holding trauma kits and a stretcher. More troops poured in after them, spreading out, locking the platform down in seconds. None of them flinched at the sight of the body lying on the deck. And then the unmarked team climbed up. Well, they didn't hesitate. They went straight to the corpse. One rolled out a thick black sheet beside it while another pulled on heavy gloves. A third produced a body bag. Another raised a high-end camera and started taking photos from every angle. No questions, no reactions, just work. They wrapped the thing, sealed it, and prepped it for transport like they'd done it 100 times before. No one asked us anything. Captain Sarah Hayes came up as they were finishing. Full kit, command posture. Her face was locked down tight, like she'd already decided how this was going to go. She scanned the platform. Brass, blood, wrecked gear, but gave nothing away. "Medical first," she said, heading straight for Alan. "Status?" The medic dropped to one knee and cut away Alan's sleeve. Damn, the claw marks were ugly, 4 deep grooves carved into his forearm, but they'd stopped bleeding. Left forearm lacerations. Deep, clean, no arterial damage. He'll need stitches and antibiotics. Hayes nodded and turned to Rick and me then. "Anyone else hurt?" "No, ma'am," Rick started. "Right, we'll cover everything else at debrief," she cut in. "Treatment comes first." I watched the cleanup crew maneuver the body toward the ladder, handling the stretcher through the narrow opening like they'd rehearsed this. Minutes later, the platform looked clean. No blood, no body, no proof. The medics got Alan on his feet and prepped him for the climb down. Rick and I gathered our gear under supervision. I noticed Alan's rifle and parts of the radio setup being quietly taken by soldiers who weren't medics. "Right, time to move," Hayes said. "Transport's waiting." Before heading down, I took one last look through the scope at the tree line. Just trees. Pines and oak. Still. Normal and no movement. No sign anything had ever crawled out of that darkness. But I knew better. Nothing about tonight was a glitch or a hallucination, and the speed of the response told me the truth. This wasn't new. The descent took forever. Alan moved carefully, soldiers spaced along the ladder to guide him. At the bottom, 3 vehicles waited. Different vehicles, different destinations. They were splitting us up. I tried to catch Hayes' eye. "Ma'am, about what happened?" "Debrief," she said without looking at me. "Medical first, questions later." The door shut behind me, and the vehicle pulled away. The driver didn't speak. Through the window, I watched crews scrubbing the tower base clean like the night had never happened. And 6 hours later, the antiseptic smell was still clinging to my uniform. 6 hours of tests, scans, and questions that focused more on our heads than our bodies. They kept us apart the entire time. Different rooms, different doctors, different forms. Now I followed a sergeant through corridors that I had never seen before, past security checkpoints that demanded badges and verbal confirmations. None of this was routine. We stopped at a heavy wooden door with only a room number on it and motioned me inside. The conference room was spotless. A long table, perfectly arranged chairs, bare walls except for the President and the Secretary of Defense staring down at us under harsh fluorescent lights. Rick and Alan were already seated. Alan's arm was freshly wrapped, white gauze stark against his sleeve. He looked rough, but he was alert. Rick sat straight-backed, his hands folded, his expression locked into something neutral and obedient. Across from us sat 3 officers that I recognized, but had never dealt with directly. And whatever answers we were about to get, I knew they wouldn't come cheap. Colonel Robert Graham sat in the middle seat, silver eagles on his shoulder catching the fluorescent glare as he studied a thick file spread across the table. His grey hair was immaculate, not a strand out of place, and his uniform looked untouched by the chaos of the night before. No signs of dust, no sweat, no sign he'd lost a minute of sleep. To his right sat a major with the name Davidson stitched over his pocket, and to his left a captain I didn't recognize at all. All 3 of them looked calm, prepared, like this meeting had been scheduled long before we ever climbed into that tower. Colonel Graham closed the file and lifted his eyes to us. They moved slowly, taking inventory. Our posture, our faces, Alan's bandaged arm. His expression stayed neutral, but his body language told me everything. This conversation already had rails, and we weren't steering. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth and practiced, the kind that didn't expect interruption. "Command wants to express its concern for your welfare following last night's incident." That word landed wrong. Incident? Small, harmless. "Medical reports indicate Specialist Anderson required treatment for lacerations," he continued. "But all 3 of you have been cleared for duty, pending psychological evaluation." I shifted in my chair and my skin crawled. The way he'd framed it. Clean, controlled, clinical. It felt like someone trying to shrink a nightmare into a filing error. "Before we review your statements," Graham said, "you need to understand the sensitivity of this matter. Everything discussed in this room is classified at the highest level. Any unauthorized disclosure would constitute a severe breach of military security. The consequences should be obvious." Major Davidson opened his own folder and began reading, his eyes locked to the page. "At approximately 22:30 hours, he said, 3 personnel assigned to Tower 7 experienced what subsequent evaluation determined to be a mass psychological episode. Contributing factors included sleep deprivation, elevated stress related to pre-deployment conditions, and the isolation inherent in night guard duty." Those words hit me like a slap. What a psychological episode. And that's what they called it. Not the bodies, not the screaming, not the thing that ripped Alan's arm open. "Sir," I said, unable to stop myself. "With respect, that isn't what happened." And Colonel Graham cut me off instantly. "You'll have an opportunity to speak after the findings are reviewed." Davidson didn't even look up. "Initial reports from Tower 7 described hostile entities approaching the position," he continued. "However, follow-up investigation found no evidence of unauthorized personnel in the area. Physical inspection of the tower and surrounding grounds revealed no signs of combat activity or perimeter breach." It was a lie. A clean one, a practiced one. God, I'd watched the clean-up team erase everything. Brass swept up, blood scrubbed away, the body sealed and hauled off like trash. And now this man was telling us none of it had ever existed. "Radio communication disruptions reported by Tower 7, Davidson went on, were attributed to atmospheric interference associated with prefrontal weather systems moving through the region. Similar disruptions were logged at multiple installations across the southeastern United States during the same time window." Rick leaned forward slightly. Well, I could see it on his face, the hesitation, the crack forming. The explanation was detailed, technical, and wrapped in authority. It sounded reasonable, especially if you wanted it to be. But I remembered the radio speaking in my own voice. Colonel Graham took over again now, flipping to another section of the file. Specialist Anderson's injuries, he said, were consistent with lacerations sustained during a fall against metal equipment. Medical evaluation found no indicators of animal attack, blunt force trauma, or weapon-related injury. I looked at Alan now. His arm was wrapped from wrist to elbow, white gauze already stained through in places. His wounds were real, but Graham's certainty was starting to gnaw at him. I saw it in Alan's eyes, the doubt creeping in, rewriting his own memory. And then Captain Hayes spoke. "Wildlife," she said evenly. "Perimeter monitoring picked up a single large deer moving through the area around 2300 hours. Night vision can distort depth and shape, especially under stress." A deer. They were standing there straight-faced telling us that a deer explained over 100 figures in combat gear, climbing steel like spiders, screaming like something not meant to exist. I realized then, this wasn't a debrief. It was a correction. The explanation was so ridiculous I almost laughed out loud. Almost. Well, the looks on their faces stopped me. They weren't joking. They expected us to swallow it whole. "That's not possible," I said, the edge in my voice slipping through despite my effort to keep it steady. "We all saw the same thing. Multiple figures, military gear, moving together. And the one that hit Alan, God, his mouth was full of teeth and black eyes. That wasn't a deer." Colonel Graham didn't react, though. He didn't need to. He glanced down at his notes and finished the thought for me. "Classic stress-induced hallucination patterns, Specialist Mitchell," he said calmly. "Sleep deprivation combined with elevated adrenaline can produce vivid false memories. Experiences so detailed they can feel indistinguishable from reality. It's far more common than you'd expect." He flipped a page and slid the file forward, turning it so we could see charts, graphs, lab values, all clean, all official, all clinical. "All three of you showed significantly elevated cortisol levels," he continued. Severe fatigue. Under those conditions, the brain is fully capable of constructing elaborate false experiences. The fact that your accounts align actually supports the diagnosis. Shared stress environments frequently produce overlapping hallucinations. Well, the paperwork looks airtight. I knew they hadn't taken our blood until hours after the attack, long after the cleanup, long after the tower had been scrubbed clean. Plenty of time to manufacture numbers that fit the story they wanted on record. Rick cleared his throat then, breaking the silence. "Sir, the radio. What about the radio traffic we heard?" Major Davidson answered instantly, like he'd been waiting for it. "Atmospheric interference, fully documented. Communications disruptions were reported across a wide region last night. Tower 7 was not unique." I watched Rick's expression shift at this. The certainty in Davidson's voice did exactly what it was meant to do. It planted doubt. If the interference was real, official, then maybe the radios hadn't been part of the attack. Maybe it had all been equipment failure layered on exhaustion. But I remembered hearing my own voice come through the speaker, words I'd never said. Colonel Graham leaned forward then, his elbows on the table, and locked eyes with each of us in turn. "You need to understand this," he said quietly. "What you experienced felt real. I'm not disputing that. But it was not real in any objective terms. Your minds created a shared false event under extreme conditions. That does not reflect weakness or failure. It just reflects biology." His tone softened then. It was almost reassuring, almost kind. But the message underneath was sharp and unmistakable. Accept this or lose everything. "The priority now," he went on, "is moving forward with an accurate understanding of events. Military service requires sound judgment and reliability. I believe all three of you are capable soldiers. However, continued fixation on false memories or conspiracy theories would raise serious concerns regarding psychological fitness." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The threat was wrapped in professionalism, delivered with a polite smile and a pen hovering over our careers. Part 4. 3 weeks after I'd signed the statement, 3 weeks after I agreed to a lie, I walked through the front gate of Fort Braxton with my stomach in a constant knot. Well, the base looked unchanged. Perfect rows of buildings, clean roads, soldiers moving with routine efficiency. But it didn't feel the same. I caught myself scanning the tree line beyond the fence without realizing I was doing it. The first thing I learned when I checked back in was that Rick and Alan were gone. Both had requested immediate transfers. Rick to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, Alan to Fort Hood, Texas. They didn't say goodbye. And their transfer requests went through fast, really fast. Approved, stamped, and executed within days of the debrief. The admin clerk handed me my revised duty roster and told me both moves were logged as family hardship cases, urgent enough to justify immediate reassignment. Well, that was bullshit. They'd split us up on purpose. Distance was easier than discipline. Keep us apart, keep the stories from sinking, keep one man's certainty from propping up another's doubt. Isolation made the psych work cleaner and quieter, one mind at a time, no reinforcement, no shared version of the truth to push back against the official line. My first mandatory appointment with Dr. Jennifer Lewis hit the schedule at 1400. Base medical, a wing I'd never set foot in before. I found her office down a long, dead hallway lined with identical doors. No names, just numbers and bland labels. Psychological services, stress management, behavioral health. The place stank of disinfectant. It was built to feel ordinary, safe, and clinical, but nothing about it suggested monsters or dead towers or 7 missing hours. Dr. Lewis was in her 40s, a calm and composed woman, credentials framed neatly behind her desk. Civilian clothes, dark blazer, neutral blouse. She looked like she could have pulled straight out of a private practice downtown. But it was the posture that gave her away. Yes, military, clean. Military still. Her handshake was firm, her eye contact precise, and the way she asked questions felt less like therapy and more like an interview with an objective already decided. "Sit wherever you're comfortable," she said, gesturing to a small circle of chairs. "Everything we discuss here is confidential. My job's to help you process the stress you experienced during your recent guard assignment." I took the chair facing the window, partly so I could keep the door in sight, and partly because watching soldiers move normally across the base helped keep my head straight. She sat behind her desk and opened a thick folder. My name was on the tab. I didn't need to ask what was inside. "I reviewed your case in detail," she said. "What you experienced 3 weeks ago was a significant psychological event. I want to help you understand what happened to your mind under those conditions." "Not what happened to you. What happened to your mind?" The distinction was deliberate. From the first sentence, the battlefield was inside my skull. The conclusion was already written. This was not treatment, it was correction. She pulled out textbooks, research papers, charts dense with graphs and annotations. "The human brain is extremely good at lying to itself," she continued. "Under intense stress, sleep deprivation, and isolation, it can generate experiences that feel fully real. Sight, sound, touch, even pain. People cling to these memories because, neurologically, they were real to them." She showed me diagrams of neural activity, scans lit up in clean colors, chemical charts explaining how cortisol and adrenaline could rewrite perception. It all looked airtight. Peer-reviewed, impossible to argue with unless you'd been there. "Now, what makes your case especially notable," she went on, flipping to another section, "is the group component. Shared hallucinations are well documented. When multiple individuals experience the same stressors, their false memories can align. They reinforce each other. A collective narrative forms, and certainty grows around it." She looked up at me then. She was calm and patient. "Now they feel absolutely true," she said, "even when they aren't." I listened to her talk while watching how she worked. Every sentence was a calculated strike. Ooh, soft, careful, meant to loosen my grip on my own memories while offering cleaner, safer explanations in their place. She never called me a liar, never hinted I was unstable. Instead, she framed everything as normal brain behavior pushed too far by abnormal conditions. No, not madness, not weakness, just chemistry and fatigue doing what they do. "All right, let's start with the radio," she said, pulling out a legal pad. "Tell me what you remember and how it affected you." I gave her the same version I'd already given command. The endless dead air, the responses that came back wrong, our own voices speaking sentences we'd never said. Conversations about evacuations and emergencies that hadn't happened yet. The silence afterward, the total isolation. She just nodded the entire time. Oh, like she was humoring a kid recounting a nightmare. When I finished, she leaned back slightly. Atmospheric interference, she said, could do strange things to radio traffic. Signals bouncing off ionospheric layers, delays, echoes, loops. What I thought were impossible responses were likely fragments of earlier transmissions, distorted and replayed out of sequence. My stressed brain had filled in the gaps and turned noise into meaning. She backed it up with theory. Physics, propagation models, enough technical language to make it sound airtight. But I remembered the clarity of those voices, the precision, the way they spoke in full sentences about what was coming, not what had already happened. No interference explained that. "Now tell me about the figures," she said, her pen poised. "Start with the first one." I told her about the shape of the tree line, being too still and too tall. Then the others appearing one by one, stepping out of the woods like they'd been cued. How they moved together, how they stopped together. Well, she took notes while I talked, occasionally murmuring encouragement, letting me walk myself deeper into it. When I finished, she tapped her pen once. "A deer," she said. Wildlife Censored had logged a large deer moving through the sector around the same time. At range, through night vision, a deer standing still could look human, especially if you were already tense, already expecting trouble. She even showed me photos. Deer through night optics. Washed out shapes, wrong proportions. I could see how someone might misread it if they wanted an answer badly enough. And the rest, she continued, were stress multiplication hallucinations. Your brain took a single stimulus and copied it as your anxiety escalated. It's common with exhaustion and hypervigilance. Well, for 45 minutes, she took my memories apart, piece by piece. The thing that attacked Alan became a dissociative episode. He'd fallen into radio equipment, sliced his arm open himself. The gunfire turned into imagined combat, our minds inventing violence to justify the adrenaline spike. Every detail had a replacement explanation, every horror had a footnote. By the end, I felt wrung out, hollow. God, her confidence was exhausting. She made doubt feel reasonable, logical even. If interference could really do that to radios, if stress could build hallucinations that vivid, then maybe I was wrong. That night, I dreamed of the creature again. I saw its face clearly, the mouth split wide across its head, packed with jagged teeth like shattered glass, eyes black and flat, reflecting nothing, no blur, no distortion. I woke up at 3:30, my heart hammering, the sheets soaked through. I sat there shaking, certain no tired brain could invent something that precise, nothing that intentional. Well, the sessions kept moving. Twice a week, same themes, different angles. Wear-down tactics. She had me read papers on false memory syndrome, watch interviews of people calmly describing hallucinations they once swore were real. She walked me through exercises designed to prove how fragile perception was under pressure. Well, eventually, I learned the game. I gave her what she wanted. I admitted stress might have skewed my judgment, that weather could explain the radio failures, that group dynamics might have colored what I thought I saw. I never believed it. But I learned how to sound like I did. 6 weeks in, she smiled during our final session. "I'm pleased with your progress," she said. You've shown real insight into the psychological factors behind your false memories. I'm confident you're ready to return to full duty." She signed the form and slid a copy across the desk. Officially, I'd processed the episode. No lingering delusions, no conspiracy thinking. Cleared for all duties. Recommended for normal advancement. On paper, I was fixed. But in my head, nothing had changed. When I pulled my permanent file, the incident was gone. No tower duty, no emergency response, no medical evaluations, nothing. The night we nearly died had been scrubbed clean, sealed off and erased like it never existed. Whatever reports we'd written, whatever signatures we'd signed, had been swallowed by classification and buried somewhere I'd never see. I went back to regular rotations, but I never stood guard again. Didn't raise my hand for night shifts. I didn't take posts away from people. I put in for daytime assignments in crowded sections of the base, maintenance checks, admin work, training oversight. Well, anything with lights, noise, and witnesses. My supervisors approved every request without a word. No lectures, no pushback, just quiet understanding, the kind that didn't need to be spoken out loud. As my enlistment wound down, I started to see Fort Braxton differently. Places I'd passed 100 times suddenly had extra fencing, new checkpoints, armed guards where there hadn't been any before. Entire sections locked behind access restrictions I didn't recognize. Unmarked vehicles rolled in and out at odd hours, and civilians moved through secure buildings with purpose but no unit patches, no name tapes, no explanations. The worst were the teams I saw near the perimeter. I caught glimpses of them during routine movements, small groups working close to the tree line or in zones marked off limits to regular personnel. Their gear wasn't standard issue. It was too clean and too advanced. Their movements were tight and precise, like they were trained for something very specific, something that didn't show up in any field manual I'd ever read. 6 months after the tower, my contract ended. I had the evaluations, I had the time in service. I was on track for promotion, but I didn't re-enlist. When my CO asked why during the exit interview, I gave them the safe answers. Civilian goals, new opportunities, different paths. The truth stayed in my mouth, unspoken. I couldn't stay in an organization that erased reality when it became inconvenient, then forced its own people to swallow lies about their own memories. No, I couldn't trust an institution that hid the nature of the threats it was dealing with while sending soldiers into routine assignments that clearly weren't routine at all. Civilian life took me to Charlotte. After 4 years of schedules, formations, and structure, it felt unreal. I rented an apartment in a quiet neighborhood, found work at a private security firm that liked my background and didn't ask too many questions. I built a routine, normal hours, normal streets, normal people. Even told myself I was moving on. But the dreams followed me. Every night was the same. Sometime between 3 and 4 in the morning, I jolted awake with my heart trying to tear its way out of my chest. The images came back instantly. The thing's warped face, that impossible grin stretched too wide, the sound of dozens of voices screaming in perfect unison. And those eyes, solid black with no reflection, no depth, like holes punched straight through reality. The dreams wouldn't fade. I'd lie there for hours afterward, staring into the dark, listening for sounds that didn't belong in my apartment. Pipes shifting, wind brushing the siding, footsteps that might not have been footsteps at all. Every shadow felt loaded, like it was just waiting to move. Daylight didn't fix it. I moved through the world on edge, keyed up in a way that went far beyond caution. I didn't walk alone after sunset. I checked my locks over and over before sleeping. I arranged furniture so I had clear lines of sight to doors and windows. God, it was exhausting, but it felt mandatory, like some part of my brain never stopped screaming that the hunt wasn't over, that whatever we'd faced hadn't finished with me yet. 3 months into civilian life, and I started digging. I spent nights searching for anything tied to classified incidents or military cover-ups, hoping to find proof that other soldiers had seen what we saw. The internet was flooded with garbage, conspiracy forums, anonymous posts, stories that collapsed under even basic scrutiny. There was nothing solid, nothing that lined up cleanly. If real encounters existed, they were buried deep, erased with the same precision that had wiped Tower 7 from my record. It was the isolation that wore me down the most. Rick and Alan had swallowed the official explanation and stayed in uniform. They stopped answering my calls, stopped replying to messages. As far as they were concerned, it was all over. I couldn't talk to family or friends without sounding unhinged, and the veterans I met through work had zero interest in classified incidents or things that didn't fit inside neat, comfortable boxes. Sometimes I drove past Fort Braxton on Highway 87, taking the stretch where the fence line came into view. From the road, it looked calm, orderly. Just another base doing its job. Guards on rotation, vehicles moving in predictable patterns. But I knew better. I knew that somewhere beyond what civilians could see, specialized teams were dealing with things that never made it into reports and never reached the news. It was 2 years after the tower, and the feeling had never left. Every morning I woke up convinced something was watching my apartment from the darkness outside the windows. It was the strongest just before dawn, when the world went quiet and shadows felt thicker and heavier. I kept the curtains closed. I avoided looking out. But the sense of being observed clung to me like a second skin. I knew they were still out there, beyond the safe edges of Charlotte's neighborhoods and shopping centers. And what was worse, I knew the military understood exactly what they were. The response teams, the rehearsed cover stories, the careful psychological pressure. None of that came from improvisation. No, it came from experience. What happened on Tower 7 was not a fluke. It was part of a pattern. Ongoing contact, ongoing conflict, managed quietly and efficiently for years, maybe even decades. They had clean-up protocols, witness control procedures, ways to make sure anyone who saw too much either learned to repeat the right story or vanished from service altogether. God, atmospheric interference, stress hallucinations, a single fucking deer. Just another script from a playbook they'd used before and would use again. Somewhere else right now, other soldiers were probably sitting in sterile offices, nodding along in counseling sessions, learning how to say the right things while their real memories were locked away and erased. I finished my coffee and shut the laptop. The research would continue tomorrow and the day after that, because even if I couldn't prove what we'd seen, even if I couldn't convince anyone else, I knew the truth. And deep down I was certain of one more thing. One day those creatures would come back for the witnesses who slipped through their fingers the first time. And when they did, I planned to be ready. Well, you know what they say, it's not paranoia if they're out to get you. Well, another incredible story there, thanks to the author, Augustus Cordoba, for another fantastic effort. Hope you enjoyed that one. Thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to say in the comment section below the video, and as ever, I will do my best to join in the conversation. Well, the sun's setting after 5 o'clock again, so the worst of winter is behind us up here in the northern hemisphere. And, a bit of sun today does make such a difference to the mood. Well, that's it for Sunday evening. Back again, maybe tomorrow. I've got a busy work day tomorrow. I'm in a campus, long distance from my home, so traveling a lot. But maybe tomorrow, definitely Tuesday, if not. So hope to join you again. Did that all in one go. I'm at that point where I'm not making any sense at all. So I'm going to shut up. Till the next time, my dear friends, you'll sleep well, yeah? Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.